alone in this house. Surrounds me. I'll never get enough to let go of my pain. To hell with my pride. All by myself would sure hit me hard now that you're gone. Or maybe unfold some more yellow lost love letters. It's gonna hurt bad before it gets better. But I'll never get over you by hiding this way. I thought that being strong meant strong don't care. I'm not the deal. I've not been there. Treading numbers, screaming at Nick Bear. On the job is to stay alive. It takes all your power, but you don't care. I'm not the deal. I've not been there. Not been there. I've not been there. I've not been there.
He's a fool and I'm in. Be with I
Good afternoon. Is it on? Is it on? No. I don't know. How do you turn up? We will get started in a few minutes. I just ask that that folks turn off their cell phones because somebody guaranteed, probably in that back corner over there, will have their cell phone on. So please do that. Thank you. Good afternoon. And thank you for coming to a celebration of life for Michael Thornton. My name is Mark Miles. This is supposed to be easy. I've been a friend of Mike's for over 55 years, friend of Reenie's for 26 years. I've been gifted with those friendships, and as gifted with the fact that my children, Matthew and Victoria, grew up calling him Uncle Mike and Aunt Reenie. When I told Matthew of Uncle Mike's passing, he held me. And my daughter sent a message saying, although I haven't seen Uncle Mike in a long time, he'll always hold a special place in my heart. And actually, I was down in PI visiting her this summer, and we talked about visiting Uncle Mike and Aunt Reenie. She said, I always loved going to Ronald Avenue, she said. Big basement to play in, and it always came with a dog. That was her memory. So now we begin the service by asking Luke Budick, Matthew's, or Michael's grandson, to sing Hallelujah for us.
I heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do you? Well, it goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, and the major lift. The baffled king composing hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. hallelujah. But your faith was strong, but you needed proof. You saw her bathing on the roof, her beauty and the moonlight overthrew you. She tied you to her kitchen chair, she broke your throne, she cut your hair, and from your lips she drew the hallelujah. 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 Baby, I've been here before. I've seen this room and I've walked this floor. I used to live alone before I knew you. I've seen your flag on the marble arch, but love is not a victory march. It's a cold and it's a broken hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah.
Thank you, Luke. Beautifully sung, beautiful song. I could hear Mike singing along with you in that voice of his. So the order of service is such that I'm going to have opening remarks. And then Ann Jones, Mike's sister, will share life with Mike as a brother. Brian Bolt, his dear friend, will share life of their religious upbringing together. Murray Engstrom will share life with his life in Ducks Unlimited. And then Matthew will share life with as Michael as his father and grandfather figure in their lives. I want to acknowledge that though Mike's mom, Pat, who was 97 with osteoporosis, and brothers Burke and Doug aren't able to be here today, but they are watching through live stream. But Pat and Ann and Doug were able to fly out a few weeks ago to see Mike and say the goodbyes. And, you know, Mike and, or Pat and Lou, been married for almost 74 years. And Lou is at the age of 95, I believe, just passed away, 96, just passed away 6 months ago. That's a pretty amazing story. We would also like to thank her family, or Ann, for coming, and her brothers Doug, Reg, and John, who came with their wives. Val, what? Did you tell me wrong? Don, Reg, John, Val, Gail, Ann. Don, Reg, and John. Yeah, that's what I said. Oh, man. Shouldn't have the family in the front row here, I'll tell you that. So it makes it confusing. So anyway, I'm going to share some stories. And it's really an evolution of friendship that evolved a long time ago. And I can't tell this story, though, without including some other characters, because there are 5 of us here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us here who have known Mike for a long time. And the journey begins, well, it's been recorded. I just read an article a few weeks ago saying that a number of wonderful people were born in February of 1956. And Michael was one of those, born on Groundhog Day. That made it so easy to remember. And he was born in Saskatoon. But a year later, if I'm correct, moved to Winnipeg. Ann and Burke and Mike packed up and came east. And I just want to briefly mention Pat and Lou. They are absolutely two of my favorite people in life that I have met. There is nothing like a journey to 251 Campbell Avenue, where they grew up, to go down into the basement to have a refreshment or two, Dixie biting at your feet, their little dog, snapping away at you. And Lou would come down sometimes and maybe have a drink with us and laugh at us. I like to say laugh with us, but usually just laughed at us. And then Pat would come downstairs and just kind of look at us and roll her eyes and shake her head at us, going, you guys aren't the sharpest tools in the shed. But it was always a joy to go there. They were such loving, loving people. It was just wonderful to have known them. So the journey begins at Queenston School. And David Morton, who's with us, and Mike met probably in kindergarten or grade 1, somewhere along those lines. And and I'm going to use nicknames a lot, and I apologize for that. I'm going to try and use real names, but I know 40 guys here, and I don't know their real names. We just don't do that. So Mort soon found himself in ball hockey games with the Thornton boys, playing for the Virgin Cup. So yeah, you can ask Mort the origin of that, but so they often were playing those games. And then when Mort was in grade 4, he got moved over to Robert H. Smith because he was a smart guy and he had to be in this called major work class. And at Robert H. Smith, he found Buzz and I. That's Brian Bolt and myself were there. And so we got to know each other a bit. And then in grade 7, 1968, the fall of 68, we ended up at River Heights Junior High School. And from Grosvenor School come Paul Sawyer and Steve Montgomery. Although I believe Mounts might have been there a little bit before us. And so this group of guys start to know each other really well in junior high school. And now the education gods must have been laughing that year because they decided they're going to put Brian Bolt and Mike Thornton in the same classroom together. And they were just 2 doors down from my room, and I can still remember how many teachers went on leave that year as those two wound their way through the school. It gets even better, though. You'd think after that year together that they'd keep them apart for this year, but I just happened to have our yearbooks from them, and I went back and looked. Grade 9, they put Mike and Brian back together, and this time they put Mort in the classroom with them. Now that's kind of a fall from grace. Major work in grade 4 and grade 9 with Mike and Buzz. Like, there you go. So, but that room, they're in room 3. And I was in room 2. And room 3, I'll tell you, Brian and Mort got into stories about that one. I just remember somebody coming through the ceiling of the roof one time and something like that. That teacher retired after that year. But I looked up what it said about them. His grade 9-year graduate. And so they said Mort was a football player who was afraid of injuries. It was actually a pot roast that got him, but that's another story. Buzz was a hockey player whose ambition was to do nothing. Well done, my friend. Well done. And Mike, you could have asked me 10,000 questions about Mike, and I'm pretty sure I'd know all of them. Mike was the classroom president. Did you know that? Who kerfuffled in the hallways. What a wonderful expression. In the hallways and up in the ceiling of the roofs, apparently. So anyway, and that's those friendships. My friendship with Mike really grew in grade 12. We hung around a lot together, group of friends. But in grade 12, we didn't play high school football. We went and played midget football at River Heights. And there was only like 18 or 19 of us on that team. We had to dig up guys from Charleswood to come and join us. But Steve and I and Mike and Mort were all on that team. And Cardi joined us at that point in time. And that team is the most close-knit team I have ever played on. We were incredibly close. And Mike and our friendship really grew that year. To the point that we were talking probably after the season ended and sometime in the winter when it was a cold night. And we decided we're going to take a year off of school. He said, yeah. Mike was already doing that in grade 12, but again. But we decided we're going to take a year off. And somewhere along the line, we decided we're going to paddle the Mississippi River. Now, I think the story was that a dad and his son had paddled the Amazon. So we figured we could paddle the Mississippi. We didn't make any plans to get back. We were just going to paddle down to New Orleans, have a good time. So anyway, we took a year off together. And Pat's going to be rolling her eyes and shaking her head at this one. But the Thorntons had moved over to Waverly Street, and I lived on Oxford Street. Well, Pat worked in the schools in the morning, and my mom worked in the schools in the afternoon. So guess what we did? In the morning, I'd walk down to Waverly, and we'd hang out. We'd watch The Price is Right. And then we played ball hockey for a while. And then once we knew my mom had gone to school, we'd walk back down and hang out at Oxford Street for the rest of the day. And then we'd act as though, yeah, we were working hard and stuff like that. We had some of the weirdest jobs that year together. Most of them lasted 3 weeks and then we were out. So we said, if we're going to travel, we need some money. So we went back to work on the railroad. And all these guys here work gang work on the railroad. So we're down by Thunder Bay, and we'd lasted a couple months at this one, and then we decided we were done with that job too. And I had a car. So we quit and we drove into Thunder Bay, and we decided if we're going to travel to Mississippi, we should practice. So with my parents' Esso credit card, how many people knew Esso had a credit card? We went to Eaton's and we bought a raft, a rubber raft. And we drove probably 20 miles out of Thunder Bay, and we all know the terrain down there. And we saw a little river. Well, let's throw this thing in and let's go. Well, we got in, and of course, the current's going downstream, and we're going with it. We're thinking, this is easy. And then we turned around to try and come back, and we said, this isn't working. And there are the two of us paddling over to the shore, getting out, dragging this raft back through the bush of Thunder Bay, or the northwest shield. And we packed up the raft and we took it back to Eaton's, and they took it back. Thank heaven for that. Who knows why they take that back. But that was one of our journeys together. And then at that point in time, I did finally leave and go to university. And Mike ended up playing football with a whole bunch of guys sitting back there. Played with the Mustangs, with Andre and Hazy and Socky. I think Buffy even played at that point in time. And he had a great time playing there. He was a tremendous football player. He won the most valuable player in a provincial championship one year. He was one of the toughest guys I ever knew on a football field. And the story went is that he got tired of football. And I just checked with Andre and Ray because I wasn't sure how Mike ever decided to become a hockey goalie, because I knew he had never skated or played hockey growing up. So Andre just told me that one night Andre said to him, we're short a goalie. They played Monday night hockey in St. Anne's. We're short a goalie. And Mike goes, I can do that. He'd never done it in his life. I can do that. So he stole, I don't know if he stole Burke or Doug's equipment, so he stole their equipment. And Mike turned into quite a goalie. For somebody who never grew up playing, he was quite an athlete and quite a goalie. Always fun to play with. The guys from the Bugs who are here, spent years playing with him. His Friday afternoon crew, years playing with him. It was just so joyful to see him. He just loved putting on the pads and having fun with everybody. At one point in time, I'd been up in the Paw teaching, and Mike had gone up to Melfort for a few years, where you'll be able to tell me more exactly when. Somewhere in the mid-'80s, he was up there. And we'd go back and forth across the Saskatchewan Road and visit from time to time. And then I moved back to Winnipeg, and I got married, and Kath and I moved in the house on Springside, and it wasn't long before we had company in the basement. Mike moved in with us in the basement on Springside, and he's hanging around there, and man, it was mid-'90s, and all of a sudden we're not seeing Mike much anymore. What's going on? And he sits down, he goes, I found her. I said, you found who? I said, I found the woman I'm going to marry. I remember him telling me that, Rini. So 26 years ago, Rini came into his life, and that is what changed Michael. That is when his life took on all kinds of meaning for him. He's blessed with so many wonderful friends and great memories, but Rini, you and your family is what he based his life on. All of you sitting here right now. He loved you guys so much. He was so proud of all of you all the time. And then, just final note, when they got married, we knew this was the right girl for Mike. Because the Bugs had decided, Mike had goalie pads probably from 1951 or something like that. And so we bought him goalie pads, and we presented them at his wedding. And there are still pictures of Rini and Mike dancing with the goal pads on. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful friendship, relationship filled with love and laughter with their family. It's a friendship that continued till the end. And I'd ask you to come and speak for the family now, please.
Hi, everyone. Hope is a good thing. Maybe even the best of things. And no good thing ever dies. That's from the Shawshank Redemption, one of Mike's all-time favorite movies. I'm Anne and Mike's sister, and I'm going to attempt to speak on behalf of his family of origin, his mom and his brothers, Burke and Doug, and his nieces and his nephews. First of all, Rini asked me to explain 143, which you often see. Actually, it was in the bottom of Michael's obituary. During World War II, letters sent and received by members of the armed forces were heavily censored to ensure no national secrets were being leaked. A couple of young and in love kids devised a way to say, "I love you," that was for their only. Airmail letters required a 4-cent stamp and a 3-cent stamp, and they would handwrite a small, discreet number 1 on the front of the envelope, preceding the 4 and the 3 stamps. The 1 stood for I, the 4 love, and the 3 you. In 1947, those kids, our mom and dad, transferred those precious numbers to the inside of their wedding bands that were worn for 4 years until March this year when my dad passed. Oops, died. Sorry, Mom. And now each of the 4 generations have found their own unique way to incorporate that message. They have been engraved into wedding bands, carved into pumpkins as a wedding proposal. And now we're getting into the 2000s, tattooed onto arms and used daily in emails and texts. So that's 143. As you now all know, that Michael entered the world February 2nd, 1956, the third of the 4 children born to Pat and Lou. I adored my new brother and quickly forgave him for not being my sister. I may have been slightly prejudiced, but Mike was beautiful with his big blue eyes and his red curls. That not only made him unique, but once he got to school, identifiable, even at a distance. He didn't start out being naughty. But if Mike was even in the vicinity of something going down on the playground, he got blamed. I think he figured if he was going to get blamed anyway, he might as well have some fun. And boy, did he. In his teens, and let's face it, beyond, he pulled out all the stops. There wasn't a dare he wouldn't take on. Car surfing, the 40 Beer Club, and some epic parties at 250 Campbell and 352 Waverly. And I'm pretty sure I recognize some of those party goers here today. A couple of Mike's friends said to me a few weeks ago, "You know, Annie, we were scared shitless of you back in the day." So let's talk about this. Our house was 4 houses from the corner of Campbell and Kingsway. And I babysat for a few families every weekend who lived way up Campbell at the far end near Academy Road. How many weekends would the midnight hours be shattered by relentless thumping of the bass and the hoots and hollers of the partygoers, signaling to all that Pat and Lou were away? I'd have to pick my way up the front steps, over bodies in various states of intoxication and undress, drag dancers off the dining room table, make the rounds to the bedrooms, suggesting that the party's over. Okay, so perhaps I was a tad more heavy handed than that, but in my defense, I didn't want Mike to get kicked out again. Fast forward several years, and I'm living in Regina, 3 kids deep, and it wasn't unusual to open the front door on a Friday night to find my Mike on the doorstep. No warning, he just decided to drive from Winnipeg for the weekend to see the kids. And oh, what an uncle he was. He bought my kids every toy a parent would never buy. Usually the ones with batteries that made the most obnoxious noises. A 6-foot Godzilla, an honest to God rocket, which of course he shot off in the front yard and had to drive through the neighborhood looking for it. A few years later, it was drum kits and motorbikes. He took my boys to R-rated movies, bungee jumping, stripper bars, which is something I just found out. You name it. And the stories he told them. To this day, he is Quagmire for short. The spy who was allowed to drive fast, who knew a Chrysler Intrepid could do 150 miles an hour, and without wearing a seatbelt because he never knew when he'd have to roll out of the car to ditch the bad guys. When my brother Doug's daughter was airlifted to Vancouver Children's Hospital, Mike flew from Saskatoon just to be there. Doug and Anne-Marie's kids also experienced the special love and attention from their Uncle Monkey. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Mike A.R. after Reenie. With Reenie, Mike found stability, acceptance, and love. My sister-in-law loved with a capital L. Reenie made a love a verb. She put her love into action, advocating for Mike, always putting his well-being first, and finding something lovable about the new Mike. Reenie, I know you feel, Mike, and you were cheated out of those carefree retirement years that we all take for granted. But I can assure you that you shared a love that few of us will ever experience. In closing, I'd like to quote one of my mother's favorite childhood stories, Peter Pan. Because who better than Mike to bring out the kid in all of us? And as Wendy, Peter Pan's Reenie, said, Peter Pan has come, and he is to teach us to fly. And Peter Pan said, never say goodbye, because goodbye means going away. And going away means forgetting. 143, Quag.
Thank you, Anne, for sharing those incredible stories of Michael's upbringing. I think there's 5 or 6 of us here who kind of wish you forgot the teen years, but from there, so. Brian.
These were Mike's favorites. I think he bought about 20 of these at Dollarama, and he'd just sprinkle them around everywhere. They were pink, they were yellow, they were... Anyways, hello everyone. I'm Brian Bolt, and for some that know me as Buzz, that name may be news to you. I was honored when Rini asked me to speak, but I am also a bit anxious about finding the right words to celebrate my friend. I've had the absolute privilege of calling Mike my friend for the last 52 years, starting with confirmation classes when we were 13 at St. Aidan's Church. Yes, we exchanged cheat notes on the test, and luckily both passed as we were drinking the wine. That and this does seem like a pattern we never gave up, the drinking and the wine part. I was Mike's best man when he married Rini in 1997, but Mike was everyone's best man his whole life. Mike had so many groups of friends, and many familiar faces are here today. His grade school friends, university, junior football, rec hockey, and work associates. All of them had the privilege of being part of Mike's life. Mike was full of mischief. His pranks were legendary, and I will leave that to others to open that Pandora box of secrets. But Mike was a best man, not because of his pranks, but because of his humor, his warm heart, his generosity, loyalty, and the mischievous twinkle in his blue eyes. One rarely gets to know another individual unless you are family, like I got to know Mike. Yes, of course, we all shared a lot of laughs over the years, played sports, drank beer, had fun with friends, teammates, our kids, Reni's kids, and of course our wives, Rini and Chris. However, the past 11 years, I knew Mike the way one person seldom gets to know another individual. I was in turn disbelieving, doubtful, concerned, anxious, and sad. While Mike and Rini struggled with the horrible realization that he was a victim of early onset dementia caused by CTE. I just didn't want to believe that my friend, who was only 54 years old, was suffering from dementia. Rini knew something was up, and I'm sure there are times in the early years where she felt very alone. Rini, for that, I am so sorry. I wish I'd been a better best man, not only to Mike, but to you in those beginning stages. Mike was frightened as the realization took hold that things he seldom gave a second thought to became a challenge. His inability to be able to operate the TV remote, his confusion in household chores, or his difficulty following a series of directions, like opening a car door and getting inside. Of course, there were some funny things too, and often that is what he and I would do, just laugh at the mishaps and carry on. Like the regular dog walks we had in the Cinnabon forest, me with Abby, and over time he with Wrigley, Millie, and sometimes sleepover Buddy Baxter. I'd meet him in the parking lot and off we would go. After 20 yards, I'd have to turn to him and say, "Hey, Mike, what are we doing?" He'd reply, "We're going for a dog walk." And I'd have to say, "Okay, where are the dogs?" With a smirk, we would both laugh. We'd walk back and we'd get some anxious dogs out of his car that he had left behind. We would talk about everything on those walks. He would talk about his upcoming trip with Rini to see his mom and dad and siblings, his grandchildren, Luke and Bo, his stepkids, Leah and Matthew, and their spouses, Myron and Candace. He loved all of you dearly. Those walks weren't just something Mike looked forward to. I did as well. We laughed a lot. It was our way of making things feel somewhat normal in an otherwise sad and abnormal situation. Mike became increasingly anxious as time moved on. Friday rec hockey became a highlight of his week. He began to pack and unpack his equipment several times a day, starting on Wednesday to make sure he had everything. In time, Rini asked me not to mention Friday hockey to Mike until Thursday night. Getting there also became a challenge. His anxiety led him to leave his house several hours early just to make sure he got there in time. His confusion on and off the ice resulted in him hanging up his skates and instead visiting with his buddies in the dressing room after, or at the annual Smitty's for the hockey pool, or the old man's club watering hole, or with guys at Breezy Bend on Wednesdays. The thing of it is, yes, I was the best man at his wedding, but he was my best man in so many ways. I try to give Rini a break and take Mike out. Rini would arrive to pick up Mike after a couple hours, and there the two of us would be standing outside our watering hole, giving each other a hug, saying, "I love you. No, 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 I love you more." And I'm sure that was a real sight for passerbys. Every life has many facets. There are others better equipped to speak of Mike's career years, his life as a Thornton son, and as a proud and loving stepdad and papa. I can speak directly of two things. Number one, Mike was my friend, a partner in crime, my unconditional support, and I can only hope I was his when he needed me. And number two, Mike was a best man to many, but he was most importantly a best man to Rini, and she in turn a best woman to Mike. I was witness to many frustrating, difficult, fearful, and sometimes angry episodes as a result of his dementia. Yet I was also witness to the most tender, caring, and loving exchanges between two people. Rini, Mike was so fortunate you were on his team. When I think about Mike, though 52 years have passed since we met, it's hard not to think of the closeness we developed because of his illness in these more recent years. However, I know there are many, many stories out there, some worthy of being told, and some that should remain under lock and key. Share those joyful occasions with others around you today as we celebrate Mike, miss Mike, and love Mike, our best man.
Thanks, Brian. You have summed up, I think, what so many of us here who have been Mike's friend would want to say. And I'll say this to you, Brian, never doubt the fact that you are his best man. Never question that. I know how much Rini relied on you and looked to you for that support. So I'd ask you, please don't think that. You were always there for Rini and the family and for Michael. And for that, we all thank you. Murray, I'd ask you to come forward.
Thank you. Thank you, Rini, for coming forward and asking me to say a few words. What Rini's asked me to do today is to say a few words about Mike and his career at Ducks. So Mike started his career with Ducks Unlimited in 1987 in Saskatchewan. Mike started as a CSR. A CSR, Ducks had a lot of acronyms. The CSR was a customer service representative, which sounds like a pretty poor title, but Mike was the guy. He was a road warrior. He went up and down the highways in Saskatchewan looking for volunteers, putting on events across the country, and raising the funds for the cause. So Mike did that throughout Saskatchewan, and in 1999, Mike went on to move to Winnipeg, and he got a job at the head office, DU head office, as the special projects coordinator. This is where Mike started working on the merchandise role for DU. 1999, Mike was promoted to the national manager of special projects and retail manager. This is where Mike was in his wheelhouse. His time spent working with the volunteers and the supporters in Saskatchewan helped mold what Ducks needed to move forward with. It was invaluable that his work, previous work, would move forward into buying the merchandise and putting the merchandise at the events. Um, he was passionate, relentless to get what he wanted. He wouldn't stop. He wouldn't stop and look behind him to see what it was. He wouldn't look on retail shelves. He wanted product that was unique to Ducks. I had talked to many of our vendors that we dealt with through the years, and these vendors that Mike had dealt with, I had dealt with, and they would tell me that Mike was innovative, way beyond his years. He was one of the best merchandise guys that they had ever worked with. Unique is what Mike wanted. He didn't want to buy something off the shelf that he just put a Duck logo on and do. He was always looking for that DU exclusive item. We saw through the pictures rolling through here, Mike with a few of the hockey players, Bobby Orr. Mike with the help of a few other people was able to pull together a deal with the original 6 hockey teams. He had Bobby Orr with the Boston Bruins jersey, a Team Canada jersey with Bobby Orr, and a hockey stick with Bobby Orr. Then he had Gordie Howe jersey, Guy Lafleur jersey, Daryl Sittler jersey, Rod Gilbert, and Bobby Hull. And then through all of those, he was able to work with Don Cherry, and we got the Don Cherry blazer. Now, a lot of the people in the room have been to Ducks events and they've seen these things. Bobby Orr was a real coup to Mike and to Ducks, as that was the very first item that Ducks Unlimited had, one single item in a year that raised over $1 million for fundraising. The great part of this was, as we've seen, Mike was able to meet these players. He adored them. He loved it. Along with merchandise, Mike also managed the retail program, which one of the programs was our online auction. And in the online auction, he worked with one of the ladies, Lorna Baker, and together for the number of years that the online auction was going, it raised over $10 million for the Ducks. So he was instrumental in doing that and moving that forward. Earlier on in the years, one of our CSRs or FMs from different province had come up with an idea to sell print on an easel. Now, we've seen them all over the place, and this guy did it in his local area, and he had success. So what he did was he brought that forward to head office, and he put it out there, and everyone thought it was a great idea. So the idea was forwarded to Mike to manage the program going forward. So Mike, along with our national framer who was in London, and a group of fundraising staff across the country, put out these easels and raised more money with the easel program than you could ever imagine. This program was so successful that it went down to the States, and our company down in the States picked it up as well, and they moved it forward. And as the years went by, other charities started to see what happened and what had transpired. And they started stealing the idea, and they started doing it as well. But it was Mike and the drive that he had, along with some support, local support, to get that going and move it out there. Mike traveled a lot in his job. He was away from home quite a bit. Mike and I got to travel to different places in the States. Orlando was a show down there that we'd go to, and what we would do down there is it would be a 4-day show, but we'd rent a house for 7 days and we'd go and golf. Mike was the type of guy where he worked hard, but he played hard too. Too many times, too many trips, we were in Las Vegas. There was a show that was in Las Vegas. Sometimes we were there twice a year. I don't gamble. Mike does. a little bit. So he'd sit at the tables and I would walk around the casino and see what's going on. And then I'd come back and pick up Mike and we'd head back to the room. And, next morning, usually we get a call from Reenie and Mike wouldn't answer the phone because he knew he was in trouble. So he'd sit there and he'd put his jacket on, he'd empty his pockets, he'd empty his pants that he had. Okay, I can phone Reenie back. I made some money last night. So he was always, it was like that most of the times when we were in Vegas. So as long as he counted the money and we were ahead of the game, away we went. Asia trips. Mike went over to China quite often. One of the pictures up here, I think it was your wedding picture where Mark Pierce was in. One of our vendors, and that's the thing with Mike. It's, as everyone said, you're making friends. He was more into making friends than he was anything else. And this was a vendor who was in his wedding party. But he went to China with these guys 3 times a year. And I think he went to China. I think he liked the country. I think he liked the environment, but I think he liked the food the best. He loved eating that stuff, which I'm not crazy about it. But so he'd go over there and it would be 3 times a year that he'd get up and go. And he'd call me all the time and say, tomorrow my flight leaves at X amount, you're taking me to the airport. So I'd drive over to their house and I'd look and here's Mike's got a bag about this big packed with his clothes. And I said, that's what you're taking for 2 weeks? He said, yeah. But then he'd have another bag about this big that he put that bag in. And I said, why are you doing that, Mike? Is the handlers that bad on your luggage? He says, no. He says, this is what I need to buy to bring back. So not only was it a buying trip for work, it was a buying trip for family and friends. Didn't matter who it was. It was Coach knockoff purchase, Rolex watches, golf clubs. It was all knockoff stuff. And he says you'd go there and you'd deal with the real stuff, and then they'd knock on the wall and they'd open up a little panel and out come the fake goods, and he'd go and he'd load it up and bring it home. And he did it for everybody except himself. He never brought anything home for himself. It was always for everybody else. So he was, Mike had a lot of different jobs going on at work, but he was also a volunteer. And I see a lot of people in here that'll remember Boys Night Out. And that he was the startup man. He started Boys Night Out. He chaired Boys Night Out, and it was in the basement of the Marion Hotel. And the name says it all, Boys Night Out. And a lot of guys will remember it. Probably the next day they remember it even more with their head. But it was always a great day, and it outgrew the basement of the Marion. He moved to a new location and carried on after that for many years. And it was always a barn burner, an event going on in Winnipeg. Mike hired me in 1999. We worked in the same office, and he found out that I liked to golf. So he said, instead of going to meet in the boardroom or into an office, let's go to the golf course. So we started golf, and we'd golf at least once a month during work time, which was awesome when you can golf with your boss because you're not going to get in trouble. So we would go out and golf and do that. And then in November, Mike invited me over to their house to meet Reenie and his 2 kids. Sorry, Matthew, Leah, not you guys. Carmen and Riggs. So went over there and had dinner, and that's when our friendship started. So that's the Ducks, employment. But I'm just going to tell a couple of stories about, some fun work stuff that we had. And, Buzz, you had mentioned a couple things about, there's these stories that we can tell and some that should be locked away in the vault. And I agree with you. There's lots and lots that should be locked away in the vault. But, a couple of them, we went to the Buckhorn for a an art show. And there was Mike, myself, and Liz Wilson, who was an employee with us. And we met Penny Burns, and Penny was a art coordinator for us for well over 20 years. Penny lived in Southern Ontario. Mike says to me, don't rent a minivan. We're not driving in a minivan. Don't rent a car. So I rent one of those Ford Explorers with a box on it, and it's got a hard cover on the back. So we drive out to Peterborough, and we pick up Penny, and we drive out to Buckhorn. We get there, and we got to get our stuff out of the box. So Mike puts the key in, turns it, lifts the lid, reaches in, and the box falls on his head. So he's pissed off. He slams the lid down, breaks the key up. It's the only key we have. So we're sitting there with a broken key, and Mike's going, well, it'll work. It's fine. You just put it in and turn it. It'll be fine. So we go and we do our art show, and we come back and we try and start this vehicle. It won't start. So we're sitting there and we're looking around, and what are we going to do? So Penny, who's our art coordinator, she's hitchhiking back to get her car. And we phone one of our other guys that works for us, Jerry. He happened to be in the area, so he drives up in his little Jeep. He rolls down his window, he drives up. He's got stain of mustard all over him. He's had a couple of wine. He rolls down his window and he looks at Mike. And I apologize, but he rolls his window down. He looks, he goes, you're the leader of the apple fucking dumpling gang. So we were able to make it back to Peterborough, rent a van, and head off for the rest of our journey. So it's always fun. And I mentioned Penny in there, and I had talked to Penny for a little bit after Rini had talked to me, and she sent Rini a nice note. And in her note, she said the same thing to me. She calls it Mikeism. And there's lots and lots of Mikeisms out there. So one last story. And this happened just maybe before I started. So I'm getting the stories from a lot of different people. But DU Inc. always had a convention. Every year they'd have a convention, and then they would do a convention in Canada every 4 or 5 years. And this convention happened to be in Quebec. So because it was Canadian, Mike decided, hey, I'm going to take Rini. We're going to go there. We're going to have some fun. We're going to have a few drinks. And these conventions consist of, meetings for the guys and excursions for the gals. And then after it's all done, they have an auction at the end of it. And the auction is, because it's DU Inc., it's US dollars. Everything is sold in US dollars. So Mike's walking around the back from what I hear, and Rini's sitting at her table, and she's enjoying a couple of beverages. And Mike sees, or Rini's seen, a few times Mike's been to auctions, and Mike raises his hand, and she goes, we don't want to buy that. What are you doing this for? He says, I'm just increasing the bid, make more money for the Ducks. So she's like, oh, okay, couple more glasses of wine. So what's Rini do? She goes, well, I'm going to increase the bid on this stuff. So she puts her hand up, and then she puts her hand up again. She puts her hand up again, and puts her hand up again, and Mike's not around. Next thing you know, sold. And Rini's looking around to see who bought it, and they go, the lady over here. So she bought this beautiful, beautiful driftwood carving of a couple of ducks or loons sitting on there for $2,500 US. Rini is panicked, doesn't know what to do. She's freaking out. Mike's over in the corner, smiling at her, waving, and he doesn't say anything. He's like, okay, everything's good. So they get this thing home. They're living on Henderson Highway, I believe, at the time, and they put it there. And then you moved over to Ronald in St. James, and you put it downstairs. And shortly after that, Mike's out hunting in Alberta, and he comes home with this cute little puppy, Wrigley. And, in the Thornton house, the dogs rule. So the dog had the rule of the whole house, and Riggs decided, it's just like a baby, it's got teeth that are hurting, so he's going to go down and chew on something. So this dog took the $2,500 US sculpture and made it into a chew toy. So Rini was, from what I hear, Rini was crying for days and days and days. on what had happened there and you know, how much money they spent on this thing and the dog ended up chewing it. But Mike never said a word to her. You know, it was okay. Everything was good. And, you know, what it was and, you know, what we think it was that he just had in his back pocket all the time was a $2,500 US get out of jail free card. So Mike could look at that and he could say, well, that'll last me about a month. So we miss him.
Thank you, Murray, for sharing those stories. There's a large number of us here who have been to a number of Ducks Unlimited lobster fests in the basement of the Marion that often turned into the most memorable nights around, and lots got sold because no one knew what they were buying. I don't think anybody ever spent $2,500 though on anything. But just quickly, I remember being at Mike and Reenie's for dinner one night, and Mike got a phone call, and it was from Don Cherry. And Don Cherry's upset because I think Brian and Kyle, you remember the story, I believe, is that he was going to auction off 300 Don Cherry suit jackets, but he had not. Don Cherry says, I haven't worn those jackets at all. So Kyle, I believe you had to go and meet Don Cherry, and Kyle, Brian's son, Don Cherry put on each one, then autographed, and then they managed to sell them all, so he didn't feel too bad about it. So Matthew, I'll ask you to speak about Michael.
Thank you, Murray, for making everybody laugh before I came up here. I appreciate that. Hello, my name is Matthew Budick, as Mark said, and I'm Mike's stepson. My mom, sister, our spouses, and Mike's grandkids, Bo and Luke, would like to give our heartfelt thanks for everyone for being here. Mike came into our lives 26 years ago, and in retrospect, as a 39-year-old man with no kids to enter into a relationship with someone with two teenagers, it couldn't have been that easy. But Mike made it look easy. His carefree demeanor, or at least us kids, and the way that he cared for us and our mom was very welcome and always made us feel at home. Over the years, our small family here in Winnipeg grew with the addition of Candace and Myron, making our Sunday dinners and Christmas holidays much more exciting and fun. But Mike always welcomed them with open arms, mostly for Candace's crossword skills and for Myron's Yahtzee skills. What felt like a very short time later, our little family grew more with first Luke and then Bo being born. Mike was a very proud papa, coming to the boys' hockey games, standing at the glass, either with Opa or Gigi, and cheering the boys on. When Mike retired and we learned of his diagnosis, he became quieter, spending time on long walks with Mom and Wrigley or Millie, but he always made an effort to engage his grandkids, and we never saw him smile as much as we did when he was with you guys. In the last year, since Mike was admitted to Victoria Hospital and then to Holy Family, we unfortunately were unable to see him. But Mom always kept us updated from her daily visits with pictures and videos, which was nice. She always made sure that he had lots of pictures of his family on the walls, his parents, his siblings, his nieces and nephews, and of course us. I like to think that even though we couldn't be there with him because of COVID, he saw those pictures and he knew that we were all thinking about him every day. Mike was transferred to Holy Family Nursing Home about 6 months ago, and we wanted to express how thankful we were for that. All the staff and the sisters treated him like family. They treated him with dignity and respect. And we couldn't have asked for a better environment for him. I truly believe he knew how much he was cared for and loved. People following around, feeding him. Mike's last week came as a surprise to us all. he had fought hard for the last 10 years, and his last moments were spent fighting just as hard. In the end, myself, Mom, Mark, were there with him to his last breath. And all I can say that I was honored to be there with him in his last moments, as much as I was to be his stepson, and having him be a papa to my sons and a loving husband to my mom. Our little family got a little bit smaller on September 5th, but it'll always be fuller because of all that Mike did for us. And we'll miss him dearly. And he'll always have a place in our hearts. Yeah. Thank you.
As Matthew just mentioned, I was with Rainey and Matthew when Mike passed away. And I can tell you this, that in the last hours, I've never seen a man loved the way Rainey loved him. The way she let him know every minute that she'd be there and that they'd meet again. It's a memory, and I'll keep forever, Rainey. I know my friend went away truly loved. When my mother passed away, I received a card that I've kept with me all the time. And it said, "What a beautiful difference one single life made." Well, Michael, you made an incredible difference to all of us here. And none more so than to Renee, and to Matthew and Leah, and Candace and Myron and Luke and Bo. As Brian said, they were your stronghold. They were who loved, and they brought you stability in your life. And so to our dear friend, from all of us here, until we meet again, may you rest in peace. The reception will be in the room back in the side here. We are asked that we wear masks and wash our hands when we're not having a drink. So a lot of us will never put our masks on, I'm sure. And then afterwards, and thanks to Ron and Andre for providing the refreshments that we will enjoy. And then after we are done here, there's a spot at Lenore Villa where you can go to and perhaps unlock some of those memories that brought so much laughter to us. Again, on behalf of Renee and her family, thank you for being here today. And let us continue to celebrate a life so beautifully